good evening, and settle in for something unexpected. Right now, as you listen to this, there's probably something you're avoiding. Maybe it's waiting in another tab. Maybe it's a conversation you need to have. Maybe it's sitting untouched in your inbox or gathering dust in the corner of your mind. And here's what makes this moment fascinating. You chose to be here instead. You're procrastinating by learning about procrastination. But here's the twist that changes everything. Procrastination isn't what you think it is. For your entire life, you've probably believed that procrastination means you're lazy, undisciplined, lacking willpower, that the solution is simple. Just try harder, manage your time better, develop more self-control. Society has told you this. Your teachers told you this. Maybe you've told yourself this over and over with increasing frustration as nothing changes. What if I told you that every single one of those beliefs is wrong? What if procrastination has nothing to do with time management or laziness? What if it's not even primarily about the future at all, but about right now, this moment, this feeling, this battle happening in your brain, between systems that evolved millions of years apart? Tonight, we're going to dismantle everything you thought you knew about procrastination. We'll discover what's really happening when you delay. We'll peer into the neuroscience of a brain at war with itself. And by the end, you'll understand why the strategies you've been using haven't worked, and what actually might. Take a breath. Let yourself settle. Because this journey begins with a simple but profound realization. You're not broken. Your brain is doing exactly what it's designed to do. The question is, what is it protecting you from? What procrastination really is. Let's start with precision, because understanding begins with accurate definition. The word procrastination comes from Latin, pro, forward, and crastinus, tomorrow. Literally, favoring tomorrow over today. But modern psychology has refined this into something more specific and more revealing. Procrastination is the voluntary delay of an intended course of action, despite expecting to be worse off for the delay. Read that again slowly. 3 elements, each crucial. Voluntary. You're choosing this. Nothing external is stopping you. Intended. You genuinely plan to do it. The intention exists. Worse off. You know, on some level, that delaying will hurt you. And yet you delay anyway. This last part transforms simple delay into irrational delay. It separates procrastination from strategic planning or reasonable postponement. When you wait for more information before deciding, that's not procrastination. It's wisdom. When you delay a difficult conversation until you're calm enough to handle it well, that's emotional intelligence. But when you put off studying, even though you know the exam is approaching, when you avoid the doctor despite symptoms that worry you, when you delay starting a project until you're drowning in deadline stress, that's procrastination. The numbers reveal how universal this struggle is. Research by Joseph Ferrari and colleagues suggests that 80 to 95% of college students procrastinate to some degree. In the general population, studies estimate that 15 to 20% are chronic procrastinators, people who delay across multiple life domains, from work to health to relationships. Perhaps most telling, over 95% of procrastinators say they want to stop. They see it as harmful, foolish, problematic. Yet the behavior persists. For most of human history, this persistence was understood as moral failing. The ancient Greek poet Hesiod warned about it in 700 BCE, writing, "Do not put your work off till tomorrow and the day after." Religious traditions framed it as sloth, one of the 7 deadly sins. The solution was simple in theory: develop more willpower, try harder, be better. But that understanding began to shift in the 1980s and 1990s. Psychologists like Jane Burka, Lenora Ewan, and Joseph Ferrari recognized something important. People who procrastinated knew how to manage time. They could create schedules, set deadlines, break tasks into steps. Knowledge wasn't the problem. Something deeper was happening. The breakthrough came in 2007 when Piers Steel published a landmark meta-analysis in Psychological Bulletin, examining 691 correlations from decades of research and synthesizing them into Temporal Motivation Theory. Around the same time, Fuskia Sirois and Timothy Pychyl were developing a complementary framework focused on emotion regulation. Together, these perspectives revolutionized our understanding. What they revealed was this: procrastination isn't about time management at all. It's about something far more primal and far more interesting. The mathematics of delay. Temporal motivation. Theory. Imagine you're sitting at your desk with an assignment due in 2 weeks. You face a choice. Start working now or watch something entertaining. What determines which you choose? Piers Steele's temporal motivation theory captures this in an elegant equation. Motivation, ease, expectancy, x value. Impulsiveness, x delay. Let's decode what this means for your brain, because each component reveals something crucial about why we procrastinate. Expectancy is your confidence that you can succeed. If you believe you can write a good essay, your expectancy is high. If you doubt your abilities, it's low. This maps directly to self-efficacy, Albert Bandura's famous concept from the 1970s, describing the beliefs people hold about their capabilities. Research consistently shows a strong negative correlation between low expectancy and procrastination. The less confident you feel in your ability to succeed, the more likely you are to delay starting. A 2007 meta-analysis by Steele found that self-efficacy correlated with procrastination at around -0.38, a meaningful relationship in psychological research. Value system captures how rewarding or aversive the task feels right now. Some tasks we value highly because the outcome matters or the process is enjoyable. Others feel punishing, boring, difficult, anxiety-provoking. Here's the key insight. Value isn't just about the end result. It's about how the task makes you feel while doing it. A task might lead to something important, graduating, staying healthy, career advancement, but still have negative subjective value if the process feels terrible. Studies on task aversiveness, how unpleasant a task feels, show it's one of the strongest predictors of procrastination, with correlations around 0.4 in Steele's 2007 review. Consider what makes a task aversive. Sometimes it's the activity itself, filling out tedious forms, making anxiety-provoking phone calls. But often it's what the task represents: a threat to self-worth through evaluation, a reminder of past failures, an overwhelming challenge with unclear starting points. The evidence suggests that this emotional component of value matters more than the rational assessment of a task's importance. Now the denominator. These factors decrease motivation. Impulsiveness is your sensitivity to delay, how impatient you are, how easily distracted, how strongly you prefer immediate rewards over delayed ones. This isn't just personality. Twin studies conducted by Daniel Gustafson and colleagues in 2014, published in Psychological Science, found that procrastination and impulsiveness share substantial genetic overlap. Their behavioral genetic analysis revealed a genetic correlation of 0.49, meaning that about half of the genetic influences on procrastination are the same genetic influences that affect impulsivity. Based on this evidence, we can infer that the same genes making someone prone to impulsive behavior also predispose them to procrastination. Delay is the time between now and the consequences. When a deadline is 2 weeks away, delay is large. When it's tomorrow, delay shrinks toward 1. And here's where it gets fascinating. Motivation doesn't increase linearly as deadlines approach. It increases hyperbolically. Imagine a hockey stick lying flat, then curving sharply upward at the end. This hyperbolic discounting pattern, first documented in behavioral economics by George Ainsley in 1975, explains why procrastinators surge into action at the last minute. It's not sudden willpower development. When delay approaches zero in the equation, even modest expectancy and value generate strong motivation. Studies tracking when students submit work show this pattern beautifully. Activity clusters right before deadlines in a characteristic hyperbolic curve. A 2001 study by Schoenberg and Groenewoud, examining 305 students' retrospective reports, found exactly this distribution. The theory also explains why certain interventions fail. Time management training alone shouldn't work, and research shows it often doesn't, because it doesn't address the core equation. You can schedule perfectly, but if expectancy is low, the task feels aversive, or you're highly impulsive, motivation won't appear when needed. The evidence here is mixed at best, with some studies showing small benefits and others showing none, suggesting time management addresses symptoms rather than causes. What might work better based on this framework? Increasing expectancy through skill building and reframing. Increasing value by connecting tasks to meaningful goals or reducing their inherent aversiveness. Decreasing impulsiveness through implementation intentions, specific if-then plans first developed by Peter Gollwitzer in 1999. Decreasing perceived delay by creating mini deadlines for subtasks. A 2018 longitudinal study by Steele, Svartdal, Thundiel, and Bruthen, published in Frontiers in Psychology, tracked actual behavior over time in both field and laboratory settings. They found that people's pacing style does indeed reflect a hyperbolic curve, with the steepness predicted by self-reported procrastination. Critical self-regulatory skills, attention control, energy regulation, and automaticity accounted for 74% of the variance in procrastination. This could imply that interventions targeting these specific skills might be particularly effective. But temporal motivation theory, elegant as it is, doesn't tell the whole story. It explains when motivation fluctuates, but not fully why. We sometimes procrastinate even when motivation should be high, or why procrastination feels so emotionally fraught. For that, we need to understand emotions themselves. The real reason. It's not about time, it's about feelings. Here's where everything changes. Here's the twist that reframes all of procrastination. You sit down to work on something important. The deadline is approaching. Motivation should be reasonable according to the equation. You value the outcome. You believe you can do it. But as you sit there, you notice a feeling. Anxiety about whether you'll do it well enough. Frustration that it feels tedious. Overwhelm because you don't know where to start. The feeling isn't catastrophic. It's just unpleasant. Uncomfortable enough that part of you wants to escape. And escape is readily available. Your phone, a TV show, making a snack, reorganizing your desk, anything to shake off this uncomfortable feeling. So you do. You tell yourself you'll start in 15 minutes, but 15 minutes later, you're still avoiding, and the project sits untouched. This, according to Fuschia Sirois and Timothy Pycyl's influential 2013 work published in Social and Personality Psychology Compass, is procrastination's essence. Not a failure of time management, but a failure of mood management. When we face tasks that evoke negative emotions, we experience task aversiveness. And humans, quite naturally, want to avoid negative feelings. When you procrastinate, you get immediate relief. The negative emotion dissipates, at least temporarily. You're doing something pleasant instead. This provides what researchers call short-term mood repair. your mood improves in the immediate present. The problem? This relief is temporary and counterproductive. The task still needs doing. By avoiding it, you've made the eventual experience worse. Now you'll have less time, more pressure, more anxiety. But in the moment of choice, your brain prioritizes immediate relief over future consequences. This reflects what Sirois and Pychyl call temporal myopia, short-sightedness about time. You're disconnected from your future self. Your present self wants to feel better now. Your future self will deal with the consequences. In the moment, they feel like different people. Research on temporal construal theory, developed by Yakov Trope and Nira Lieberman, suggests that psychologically distant events feel abstract and less emotionally salient, which could help explain why future consequences fail to motivate present behavior. Studies validate this framework extensively. A 2020 investigation published in Frontiers in Psychology by Eckert and colleagues examined emotion regulation difficulties and academic procrastination. They found that procrastination correlates specifically with difficulties in emotion regulation strategies, particularly the belief that nothing can be done to regulate emotions effectively once upset. The evidence suggests that procrastination is related to subjective appraisal about the ability to effectively modulate unpleasant emotions rather than just the use of specific strategies. When people lack healthy emotional regulation strategies, they show higher procrastination rates. Studies using experience sampling methods, having participants report their emotional states and behaviors multiple times daily, found that negative mood about a task strongly predicts avoidance. But here's the crucial finding from a 1997 study by Tice and Baumeister published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. Procrastination doesn't make people feel better long-term. While there's immediate relief, the overall effect is increased stress, guilt, and anxiety over time. This creates a vicious cycle. Negative feelings lead to avoidance. Avoidance provides temporary relief, but creates more negative feelings, both about the undone task and about the procrastination itself. These stronger negative feelings make the task even more aversive, leading to more avoidance. The cycle intensifies with each iteration. Think about how this plays out in real life. You have a presentation to prepare for work. When you think about starting, you feel anxious. What if your ideas aren't good enough? What if you forget what to say? What if people judge you? These feelings are uncomfortable, so you delay. You watch some videos instead, and for a while, you feel better. The anxiety fades, but later, you remember the presentation again. Now, the anxiety is worse because you've wasted time you should have spent preparing. You feel guilty about procrastinating. You feel more worried because now you have less time. These intensified negative feelings make sitting down to work even more aversive. So you avoid again, and the cycle continues, intensifying with each repetition, until finally the deadline forces action. But now, under conditions of maximum stress and minimum confidence. This pattern explains why procrastination often feels so difficult to escape. Each instance of avoidance temporarily validates itself by providing relief, while also setting up conditions that make future avoidance more likely. It's a trap that tightens the more you struggle against it. The emotion regulation perspective transforms our understanding. If procrastination is fundamentally about escaping negative emotions, then effective intervention must address emotional regulation directly. Time management alone won't work. It doesn't touch the core issue of task aversiveness and the lack of strategies to manage that aversiveness without avoidance. This isn't just theory. It's happening in your brain right now, in a very specific way. Inside your brain, the battle you didn't choose. Deep within your skull, an ancient battle determines whether you procrastinate. Two brain systems, evolved for different purposes, clash over control. When one overpowers the other, procrastination results. The limbic system, evolutionarily ancient, shared with other mammals, includes structures like the amygdala and hippocampus. It processes basic emotions and generates rapid responses based on immediate emotional salience. The limbic system is automatic, doesn't deliberate, and reacts instantly. If something feels good now, it says yes. If something feels unpleasant now, it says avoid. This system served our ancestors well when survival depended on immediate responses. Flee the predator, eat the available food, seek shelter. It still does in true emergencies, but it struggles with modern challenges requiring delayed gratification and long-term planning. The prefrontal cortex, evolutionarily newer, located just behind your forehead, handles executive functions, planning, decision-making, impulse control, abstract reasoning. This is where you imagine the future, weigh pros and cons, suppress immediate urges for long-term goals. The prefrontal cortex can make you do uncomfortable things because you understand their importance. But crucially, the prefrontal cortex is weaker and more demanding than the limbic system. It requires continuous effort and substantial energy. The moment you're tired, stressed, or cognitively depleted, it struggles to maintain authority. Research by Roy Baumeister and colleagues on ego. Depletion, though controversial in its original form, suggests that self-control functions as a limited resource that can be temporarily exhausted. When you procrastinate, the limbic system is overriding the prefrontal cortex. The immediate emotional pull defeats rational understanding of long-term priorities. Neuroimaging research confirms this dramatically. A 2016 study by Liu and Feng, published in Scientific Reports, used functional MRI to examine brain activity during decision-making. They found procrastination associated with reduced activity in the anterior prefrontal cortex, crucial for goal-directed behavior, while limbic regions showed increased activity. The parahippocampal cortex, involved in emotional prospection and scene construction, was particularly active. This could imply that when you're procrastinating, your brain is literally constructing appealing alternative scenarios. When you're supposed to work on a report, but can vividly imagine how nice watching that new series would be, your parahippocampal cortex is actively generating those vivid mental images, making immediate gratification feel more real and compelling than distant rewards. Studies examining connectivity patterns found procrastinators show weaker connections between the prefrontal cortex and areas involved in impulse control. The communication pathways that should help the prefrontal cortex regulate limbic impulses appeared compromised. A 2020 study by Pychyl and colleagues, published in Scientific Reports, examined error processing using event-related potentials. Procrastinators showed reduced error-related negativity. Their brains seemed less responsive to feedback that should trigger behavioral adjustment. Particularly revealing was research examining punishment contexts. You might expect threat of punishment would activate cognitive control and reduce procrastination. But a 2019 study by Pychyl and colleagues found the opposite. When punishment was anticipated, procrastinators showed reduced activity in the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex and anterior cingulate cortex, regions critical for behavioral control. Based on this evidence, we can infer that negative emotional contexts may actually undermine executive function in procrastinators, creating cognitive paralysis precisely when they most need control. This aligns perfectly with emotion regulation theory. Negative emotions don't motivate better performance in procrastinators. They trigger avoidance. The neuroscience also illuminates present bias, the tendency to strongly prefer immediate rewards over delayed ones. When researchers scan people choosing between immediate and delayed rewards, the ventral striatum and related limbic regions, the HOT system, activates strongly for immediate rewards, while the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the cool system, activates for delayed rewards. In procrastinators, the hot system appears to dominate more readily. Dopamine plays a crucial role in this dynamic. This neurotransmitter, often called the feel-good chemical, surges when we encounter immediate rewards. Scrolling social media, watching entertaining videos, chatting with friends. All of these activities trigger dopamine release, creating a sense of pleasure and satisfaction. Working on a difficult task that typically produces much less dopamine, at least initially. The reward is delayed, abstract, uncertain. So the dopamine-driven reward circuitry in your brain pushes you toward the immediate pleasure and away from the delayed benefit. This connects directly to ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. ADHD is fundamentally understood as a neurodevelopmental condition, characterized by executive dysfunction. The American Psychiatric Association describes it as a biologically based disorder and a developmental impairment of executive functions. Research shows ADHD brains have reduced dopamine function and altered reward processing. Prefrontal cortex shows reduced activity, making cognitive control and distraction resistance harder. Research has found that adults with ADHD score significantly lower on measures of executive function compared to those without the condition, often 10 to 15 points lower on standardized assessments. These deficits persist across the lifespan, though they may become somewhat better compensated with age and experience. Multiple studies confirm substantial overlap between ADHD and procrastination through executive function deficits. A 2012 study by Neerman and Sherris, examining undergraduate students, found that inattention, but not hyperactivity or impulsivity alone, correlated most strongly with procrastination. This makes sense. If you struggle to sustain attention on non-engaging tasks, you naturally drift towards stimulating alternatives. If you're easily distracted, the environment constantly pulls you from what you should do. Research suggests ADHD individuals show what's called delay aversion, finding waiting particularly difficult and strongly preferring immediate outcomes, even when those outcomes are objectively less valuable. This maps directly onto the impulsiveness and delay components of temporal motivation theory. A 2023 study published in the Australian Journal of Psychology found 3 motivational factors mediated the ADHD procrastination relationship: lower expectancy, less confidence in ability to complete tasks, higher task aversiveness, stronger negative feelings about tasks, and higher impulsiveness, greater sensitivity to delay. But procrastination and ADHD aren't equivalent. Many people procrastinate without having ADHD, and executive dysfunction occurs in other contexts: depression, anxiety, chronic stress, sleep deprivation, even normal adolescent development. The prefrontal cortex doesn't finish developing until the mid-20s, and in individuals with ADHD, it may continue developing until age 25 or later. This means that teenagers and young adults naturally have less mature executive control, making them more vulnerable to procrastination even without ADHD. The SAR genetic component adds another layer to our understanding. Gustafson's 2014 twin study, published in Psychological Science, found procrastination is moderately heritable. 40 to 50% of variation can be attributed to genes. The rest comes from environmental influences, experiences, learning, cultural context, life circumstances. Crucially, procrastination and impulsivity share substantial genetic variation. In statistical terms, they showed a genetic correlation of 0.49, meaning that about half of the genetic influences on procrastination are the same genetic influences that affect impulsivity. The evidence suggests that procrastination may have evolved as a byproduct of impulsivity, Impulsivity, the tendency to prefer immediate rewards and act quickly on urges, has clear evolutionary roots. In ancestral environments where food was scarce and threats were immediate, favoring the here and now over the distant future made survival sense. Don't delay eating the food you find. It might not be there tomorrow. Don't postpone fleeing danger. You might not get another chance. But this same tendency, transplanted into modern environments filled with long-term goals and delayed consequences, produces procrastination. The genetic predisposition towards seeking immediate gratification and avoiding immediate discomfort, useful for our ancestors, becomes problematic when applied to writing reports, saving for retirement, or maintaining health behaviors. Beyond twin studies, neuroscience research has identified specific brain structure differences associated with procrastination. A 2016 study using structural brain imaging found that procrastinators tended to have larger amygdalas, the almond-shaped structures deep in the brain that process emotions and threats. They also showed weaker functional connectivity between the amygdala and the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, a region involved in deciding which actions to take based on anticipated consequences. Based on this structural evidence, we could infer that a larger amygdala might make someone more prone to experiencing negative emotions or perceiving tasks as threatening. Weaker connectivity between the amygdala and decision-making regions might impair the ability to override emotional responses with rational choice. Together, these structural features could create a brain that more readily experiences task-related anxiety and less readily suppresses that anxiety to engage with the task anyway. But brain structure isn't entirely fixed at birth. It's influenced by genetics, yes, but also by development, experience, and even behavior itself. The brain is plastic, continuously changing in response to what we do and think. Chronic stress can alter brain structure. So can chronic procrastination, potentially creating a feedback loop where behavior shapes biology, which reinforces behavior. This raises a hopeful possibility. If brain structure can change in response to chronic procrastination, perhaps it can also change in response to successfully overcoming procrastination. Interventions that work might not just change behavior. They might gradually reshape the neural architecture that supports that behavior. This biological reality offers crucial perspective. If your tendency to procrastinate has roots in genetic inheritance and brain structure, it's not simply a matter of being undisciplined or lazy. You're working with different biological starting conditions. The battle between your limbic system and prefrontal cortex isn't one you chose to fight. But understanding that it's happening might be the first step toward changing the outcome. The consequences. What procrastination actually costs. Procrastination affects more than just deadlines. A 2023 longitudinal study by Rosenthal and colleagues, tracking 3,500 Swedish university students over 9 months, found that procrastination predicted worse outcomes across multiple domains: higher depression, anxiety, and stress, more physical pain and sleep problems, increased loneliness, and economic difficulties. This wasn't just correlation. Procrastination predicted future problems even after controlling for baseline health. Based on this longitudinal evidence, we can infer that procrastination doesn't just result from feeling bad, it actively contributes to feeling worse over time. The pathways appear multiple. The direct stress of deadline pressure that procrastinators create for themselves. Cycles of guilt, shame, and self-criticism that compound emotional distress. Poorer performance outcomes affecting self-esteem, and perhaps most seriously, impacts on physical health. Sirois' extensive research has linked chronic procrastination to cardiovascular disease and hypertension, even after controlling for age, race, education, and other personality factors. The mechanisms appear multifaceted. Chronic stress repeatedly activates the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, flooding the body with cortisol and other stress hormones. Over time, This could damage blood vessels, promote inflammation, and contribute to atherosclerosis, the buildup of plaques in arteries. Additionally, the evidence suggests procrastinators engage in fewer health-promoting behaviors. They exercise less regularly, eat less healthily, have worse sleep hygiene. Perhaps most concerning, they delay seeking medical care. When symptoms appear, appointments get postponed. When preventive care is recommended, it gets put off. This delay can transform minor health issues into serious ones. Research tracking over 22,000 employees found procrastinators had lower incomes and less job stability, approximately $15,000 less salary for each point increase in procrastination measures. They also experience more life regrets, looking back at opportunities missed and potential unfulfilled. But the picture isn't hopeless. The same research showing procrastination's harms also shows that when procrastination decreases through intervention, negative outcomes decrease too. Mental health improves, stress reduces, performance gets better, which brings us to what actually works. Breaking the cycle. What actually works. Cognitive behavioral therapy has the strongest evidence base for treating procrastination. A 2018 meta-analysis by Van Eerde and Klingsik, examining randomized controlled trials, found moderate to large effect sizes. Across studies, CBT reduced procrastination by about 0.6 standard deviations on average, a meaningful improvement. A 2025 trial published in the Journal of Rational Emotive and Cognitive Behavior Therapy showed even larger effects, 1.09 standard deviations, for group CBT with college students. CBT works by targeting both thoughts and behaviors. On the cognitive side, it helps identify and challenge unhelpful beliefs. I work better under pressure. Evidence suggests this is usually false. This needs to be perfect. All or nothing thinking. I can't start until I feel motivated. Waiting for feelings rather than generating them through action. Through cognitive restructuring, therapists help clients examine these beliefs critically. Does pressure really produce better work, or just more stress? Is perfection actually required, or is good enough acceptable for most tasks? Must motivation precede action, or can action generate motivation? On the behavioral side, CBT introduces specific strategies. Breaking large tasks into smaller, manageable pieces makes starting less overwhelming. Setting specific implementation intentions. When I sit down at my desk at 9 a.m., I will immediately open the document and write for 30 minutes. Creates behavioral cues that bypass the need for conscious decision-making. Stimulus control involves modifying your environment to reduce temptations and increase cues for desired behaviors. Perhaps most importantly, CBT addresses the emotion regulation component we discussed earlier. Techniques like behavioral activation help people approach tasks despite negative emotions, learning that discomfort is tolerable and often temporary. Interestingly, the 2025 intervention study found it impacted different components of temporal motivation theory in different ways. Value and impulsiveness improved significantly, but expectancy showed less change. This could imply the treatment worked more through increasing the perceived worth of completing tasks and reducing impulsive responding than through building confidence, though that might develop over time with repeated success experiences. Mindfulness-based approaches show particular promise. An 8-week mindfulness intervention, tested in a randomized controlled trial, produced large reductions in procrastination behavior and significant increases in self-regulation and mindfulness skills. Participants also reported lower negative emotions and fewer perceived negative consequences of procrastination. The evidence suggests mindfulness builds capacities procrastinators often lack: the ability to sit with discomfort, to notice thoughts and feelings without judging them, to choose actions deliberately rather than reacting automatically to internal states. Perhaps most intriguingly, even brief mindfulness exercises, just a few minutes, were enough to increase intentions to work on procrastinated tasks. The mechanism appeared to be improved attention regulation. mindfulness helped people sustain attention on what mattered rather than being pulled away by distractions or uncomfortable emotions. Implementation intentions, specific if-then plans developed by Peter Gollwitzer, bridge the intention-action gap with effect sizes around 0.65, compared to goal setting alone. When I feel resistance to starting, I will work for just 10 minutes, then reassess. Automates the decision, reducing opportunity for procrastination to intervene. The specificity matters. Not, I'll work on the paper sometime tomorrow, but exactly when, where, and what. Research by Sirois has also highlighted the role of self-compassion in reducing procrastination. Studies found that procrastinators show significantly lower self-compassion than non-procrastinators, and that interventions increasing self-compassion can reduce procrastination. One mechanism appears to be reduced self-blame and rumination. When you harshly criticize yourself for procrastinating, you create negative emotions. And as we've discussed, negative emotions trigger the very pattern of emotion regulation through avoidance that procrastination represents. Self-compassion breaks this cycle. What doesn't work as well? Time management training alone shows mixed results, likely because, as Sirois notes, poor time management is often a consequence of procrastination, not a cause. Teaching someone to schedule doesn't help if they're avoiding tasks due to anxiety or perfectionism. The schedule just becomes another thing to feel guilty about ignoring. The most effective approach appears to be personalized, combining strategies based on individual patterns. Someone whose procrastination stems from perfectionism needs cognitive work on unrealistic standards. Someone struggling with impulsiveness benefits from environmental modification and implementation intentions. Someone with ADHD might need medication evaluation alongside behavioral strategies. For individuals with ADHD, stimulant medications like methylphenidate and amphetamine improve dopamine and norepinephrine function in the prefrontal cortex, helping strengthen executive control. Studies have found that adults with ADHD who receive medication treatment show improvements in procrastination along with improvements in other ADHD symptoms. The hopeful message from intervention research is that change is possible. Procrastination isn't a fixed trait. With appropriate strategies, consistently applied, people can and do reduce their procrastination and experience the benefits. Less stress, better performance, improved well-being. The twist, what you really need to know. Remember what we said at the beginning? That procrastination isn't what you think it is? Here's the revelation that changes everything. You've spent your life trying to solve a time management problem. But procrastination was never about time. It was always about feelings. Every strategy that failed, the schedules, the planners, the productivity apps, the promises to just try harder, failed because they addressed the wrong problem. They tried to fix your relationship with the future, when the real issue was your relationship with the present. When you procrastinate, you're not failing to manage time. You're succeeding at managing emotions, just in a way that helps you now and hurts you later. Your brain, in that moment, is making a rational choice. Escape this uncomfortable feeling. The fact that this choice creates worse feelings tomorrow doesn't matter to the limbic system making the decision. It only knows now. This is why willpower alone never works. You're not fighting laziness or lack of discipline. You're fighting millions of years of evolution that wired your brain to avoid pain and seek pleasure. You're fighting neurotransmitter systems optimized for immediate survival, not long-term flourishing. You're fighting brain structures designed for different challenges in different environments. The good news hidden in this revelation? Once you understand procrastination as emotion regulation, the solution becomes clearer. You don't need more self-control. You need better ways to handle the feelings that tasks evoke. You need to build tolerance for discomfort. You need to recognize when your brain is trying to escape and make a different choice, not through harsh self-criticism, but through compassionate understanding. The research shows this works. Interventions targeting emotion regulation, mindfulness, self-compassion, cognitive restructuring of catastrophic thoughts about tasks produce larger, more lasting effects than traditional time management approaches. When you address the actual problem, emotional avoidance, rather than the symptom, delayed action, change becomes possible. This doesn't make change easy. Your limbic system is powerful, ancient, automatic. Your prefrontal cortex is newer, weaker, more easily depleted. If you have genetic predispositions toward impulsivity, if you have ADHD, if you have a larger amygdala or weaker connectivity in executive control regions, the battle is even harder. But understanding that it is a battle, and what kind of battle, transforms your approach. You stop blaming yourself for moral failure. You start working with your biology rather than against it. You recognize that the uncomfortable feeling before a task isn't a sign you shouldn't do it. It's a sign your brain is doing what it evolved to do, and you can acknowledge that feeling without obeying it. So the next time you find yourself procrastinating, pause. Notice what you're feeling. Not what you're thinking about the task, but what you're feeling in your body. Is it anxiety, boredom, overwhelm, shame? That feeling, right there, is what you're really avoiding. Not the task itself, but how it makes you feel. And then ask, can I sit with this feeling for just a moment? Can I acknowledge it, accept it, and still take the first small step? You might. You might not. Both are okay. Because changing ingrained patterns takes time, practice, and patience. What matters is understanding what's actually happening. Understanding that you're not broken, or lazy, or undisciplined. You're human, with a human brain, navigating challenges your ancestors never faced. The journey from chronic procrastinator to someone who rarely delays isn't about becoming perfect. It's about gradually shifting the balance, building new neural pathways, strengthening weak connections, developing tolerance for discomfort, learning to respond to feelings rather than react to them. And it starts with this moment of recognition. Procrastination was never about tomorrow. It was always about right now. A gentle ending. As you settle into sleep tonight, let these insights rest without pressure. You don't need to change everything immediately. Understanding is enough for now. Compassion is enough. Tomorrow, when that familiar urge to delay arises, perhaps you'll recognize it differently. Perhaps you'll see it not as weakness, but as your brain trying to protect you in the only way it knows how. And perhaps, in that moment of recognition, you'll have a choice you didn't have before. The research is clear. Procrastination can change. The patterns can shift. The cycle can break, not through harsh judgment or impossible standards, but through patient understanding and evidence-based strategies that address the real problem. Not time, but emotion. If you found this exploration valuable, consider subscribing. There's always more to discover about the patterns that shape us, and the compassionate understanding that can reshape them. Rest well. The future can wait. For now, this moment is exactly as it should be. Thank you for listening.